Treachery is the way of the Sith. From the early days of the Sith, well past the time of the Galactic Empire, this was a reality that followed the Sith. In their pursuit of unlimited power and eternal life, there was no room for loyalty or friendship. Others were merely tools to be used until they had outlived their usefulness, and the Sith lost no sleep over betraying or deceiving their peers. But none of this is news to anyone. Sith betraying Sith was just another Tong's Day and is hardly a revelation. But not all Sith betrayals were created equal. For every petty squabble and minor subterfuge, there were those great betrayals with consequences that reached far past their perpetrator's lifespan. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at 3 such Sith betrayals that changed the course of history and reshaped the very future of the Sith.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
In a roundabout way, the first Sith betrayal that we'll talk about is the entire reason behind the Galactic Republic and the Jedi Order's enmity with the first Sith Empire and all its subsequent iterations. In the very early days of the Sith, there were a race of proud Darksiders native to the planet Korriban in the Transhidian region of the galaxy. The Sith civilization had thrived for millennia before a group of Dark Jedi found their world, outcasts who had been banished from the Jedi Order following the Second Great Schism. These Dark Jedi had found Korriban in their exile, searching for a world potent in dark side energy, and upon landing, they subjugated the Sith with their Force powers and proto-sabers. The Dark Jedi won the respect of the Sith, and over time, they fused their teachings with those of the locals, giving rise to what most of us understand as Sith today. Ajunta Pal, one of the Dark Jedi to have found Korriban, thus became the first Dark Lord of the Sith, and over the coming centuries, many followed in his footsteps. And for the next 1,500 years, the Sith Empire prospered, expanding within their small pocket of space to over 100 worlds. However, their isolation proved to be both a blessing and a curse. The Stygian caldera, the ring of nebulae that surrounded Sith space, kept outsiders from venturing into Sith space, but also kept the Sith from expanding outwards. Being confined to their small corner of space gradually led to stagnation, and though the Empire was still prospering, they could no longer enjoy the stability Marka Ragnos, the most recent Dark Lord of the Sith, had won for them. And so, in 5000 BBY, following Ragnos' death, a debate broke out: to expand outwards or to not expand. The leaders of the 2 opposing factions, Ludo Kresh, the Lord of Relg, and Naga Sadao of Kar Delba, were incidentally also rivals for the title of Dark Lord of the Sith. Kresh, a conservative traditionalist, was in favor of remaining contained within the caldera, wary that attempts of expansion would invite attacks from rival empires. Sadao, on the other hand, believed that the Sith had to either expand or die, and Kresh's conservatism was both weakness and cowardice. The 2 rivals held the support of different castes of the Sith Empire, with Kresh supported by the Kisai priest caste and Sadao favored by the Massassi warrior caste. Immediately following Marka Ragnos' death, the 2 began the contest for power. Kresh snubbed Sadao by beginning the funeral processions before he had arrived, and no sooner had the former Dark Lord of the Sith been laid to rest than the 2 Sith Lords drew their weapons and began a duel for the throne. Before a victor emerged, however, Marka Ragnos' ghost appeared, reminding both of the Sith Empire's history and warning that a time of great change was afoot. An alien ship had arrived above Korriban. This ship, it turned out, held 2 hyperspace explorers, a brother and a sister by the name of Gav and Jory Daragon. The 2 had made a blind jump to the Outer Rim and, guided by their latent Force sensitivity, they had found their way to the secluded Sith Empire. The moment the Daragons disembarked, they were captured by the Sith, who were undecided as to what to do with them. Kresh, always the conservative, was in favor of executing them right away, concerned that they were the vanguard of a Republic invasion. Sadao, on the other hand, hoped to use them as a lead back to Republic space, where thousands of new worlds lay in wait for the Sith to conquer. In the throne room of Ziost, the two rivals made their case to the Council of Sith Lords, who ultimately sided with Kresh. The Daragons were to be summarily executed. But Naga Sadow was unwilling to leave it at that. This was too good an opportunity to pass up, and he would be damned if he allowed Ludo Kresh to get one up on him. So he nodded concession to the Council's decision and plotted betrayal behind their back. Treachery is the way of the Sith, and a Sith does not allow others to stand in their way. In secret, Sadow ordered some of his Massassi warriors to steal a pair of Republic blasters from the Daragons' ship, then stage a prison break from the Citadel's dungeon. Sadow also murdered his own mentor, Lord Simus, with one of the blasters, hoping to make it look like a Republic strike team had infiltrated the Citadel, killed the Sith Lord, and freed their prisoners. In the aftermath of the attack, Sadow called upon the Council to go to war with him against the Republic that had attacked them. Meanwhile, he smuggled the Daragons back to his fortress on Card Elba. In the face of such a ferocious and unprovoked attack, the Council of Sith Lords agreed to go to war, appointing Naga Sadow the new Dark Lord of the Sith. However, Ludo Kresh had not yet conceded defeat. Two of the council members, Dor Galram and Horak Mul, still favored him over Sadow. Together, the three Sith Lords gathered their armadas and descended on Sadow's fortress on Card Elba, bombarding it from orbit. But Sadow had prepared for this. The fortress on Card Elba was nothing but a decoy. The Dark Lord's forces were gathered instead on Kar Shian, Card Elba's moon, and once Kresh's forces began bombarding the planet, Sadow's fleet emerged from behind and began the attack. If that weren't enough, in an unprecedented turn of events for the Sith, the Massassi warriors on Horak Mul and Galram's ships rose up against their Sith overlords, slaying them and taking control of their fleets in Sadow's name. Kresh had no choice but to retreat. Now the unopposed Dark Lord of the Sith, Sadow was able to rally the Sith Empire's forces and make for Republic space. Giorgi Daragon was allowed to flee Sith space aboard her ship, which now bore a tracking beacon. The Sith armadas followed behind, prepared for war. What followed became known as the Great Hyperspace War, a galaxy-wide conflict between the emergent Sith Empire and the unsuspecting Republic, which had all but forgotten the Dark Jedi that had been exiled into the unknown hundreds of years ago. The Sith fleets, successfully catching the Republic and Jedi off guard, laid waste to many worlds, capturing others and even bombarding Coruscant and many other key core worlds. Unluckily for Naga Sadow, while the Republic had been caught by surprise, some of the Jedi had been preparing. One Jedi Knight, Odan had foreseen the attack and prepared not only the Jedi, but also Empress Teta of the Koros system, which had been one of Sadow's primary objectives. Even as the Sith took core world after core world, they soon encountered fierce resistance. In the end, the Jedi and Republic fleets were able to dismantle Sadow's fleet, forcing them to flee back to Sith space. However, when they returned to Korriban, danger was waiting for their return. Ludo Kresh, self-appointed Dark Lord of the Sith in Naga Sadow's absence, had assembled the remaining forces of the Sith Empire and prepared a welcome fleet. The moment Naga Sadow and his forces returned to Korriban, Kresh was waiting. A fierce space battle broke out, which severely damaged Sadow's fleet and utterly destroyed Kresh and his ships. Sadow's victory, however, was short-lived. Empress Teta had followed him to Sith space, accompanied by a Republic fleet that descended on the Sith like rabid ackhounds. Quickly realizing that he stood no chance at victory, Naga Sadow ordered his forces to fight to the death while he fled Sith space. Although the Republic was unable to capture him, they were successful in destroying what remained of his fleet. In the aftermath of the Battle of Korriban, the Republic Navy and Jedi forces invaded Sith space at the behest of the Supreme Chancellor, completely dismantling what was left of the Sith Empire. With most of their forces dead or destroyed and their hierarchy beheaded, the Empire's fate was sealed. What Sith remained were told to flee Sith space, but they didn't get far. In the face of the Republic and the Jedi's unceasing persistence, within a few years, most of the planets in Sith space lay in ruin. The Empire had ceased to exist, and it was all thanks to Naga Sadow's treachery. Had he accepted the decision of the Council, Had he not staged a Republic invasion in order to deceive the Sith into launching an invasion of the Republic and Jedi wouldn't have become aware of the Sith Empire's existence for a long time. Instead, thanks to his pride and conceit, he inadvertently brought about the ruination of the Sith Empire and sparked a rivalry between the Republic and the Sith that would never be extinguished. The next betrayal we'll be talking about is one that backfired so horrendously on the betrayer, it all but paved the way for their eventual defeat. Of course, we're talking about Darth Malak turning on Darth Revan, and in a way, ensuring the Republic was able to unlock the good ending in the Jedi Civil War. But let's back up a few decades to when it all began. In 3976 BBY, the galaxy and the Republic were once more thrown into chaos by the outbreak of the Mandalorian Wars, just 20 years after the devastation of the Great Sith War. In its aftermath, the Republic was weakened and still recovering its strength, as was the Jedi Order, which had lost hundreds of promising young Jedi, either to death or to the dark side. With potential opposition weakened, the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders, led by Mandalore the Ultimate, went on the warpath, carving a bloodied trail through the Outer Rim territories. Their initial assault saw millions slaughtered, but the Galactic Republic and Jedi Order were both loath to intervene, fearing a new war would jeopardize their stability even further. In 3965 BBY, approximately a decade of slaughter later, the Mandalorians finally crossed the Republic military in a year-long series of micro-clashes around the planet Taurus that became known as the False War. War with the Republic proper didn't begin until 3964 BBY, when the Neo-Crusaders pushed hard into Republic space through 3 avenues. To the horror of the Republic, the Jedi Order still refused to intervene on the Republic's behalf and take up the fight against the Mandalorians. The Jedi High Council, many of whom were also members of the Dantooine Jedi Enclave, feared for the survival of the Jedi if they were to go to war once more. War, they believed, was a corrupting factor that would lead many a Jedi down the path of the dark side, just as what had happened 30 years ago in the Great Sith War. Under the circumstances, they refused to risk more young Jedi and thus forbade the Jedi from participating in the conflict. As you can imagine, many Jedi disagreed with this decision, but it wasn't until 2 Jedi Knights stood up that things changed. Those 2 Jedi were, of course, Revan and Malak, who were equally appalled at the death and destruction the Mandalorians were sowing across the galaxy and the Jedi Council's inaction. The Jedi, they argued, couldn't stand by and idly watch as millions were slaughtered and entire species were almost wiped out by the marauding Neo-Crusaders. And so, Revan left to join the fight, and with him, hundreds of Jedi went too. These Jedi were known as the Revanchists, and together, they turned the tides of war for the Republic. Revan, you see, was a genius tactician, and his strategy was only surpassed by his willingness to sacrifice anything it took to guarantee victory. Slowly, battle by battle, he beat back the Mandalorian fleets and reclaimed lost territory. Even with staggering sacrifices, by 3962 BBY, he had been appointed Supreme Commander by the Supreme Chancellor himself. Of course, we all know how that story ends. In 3960 BBY, during the Battle of Malachor V, Revan led the Republic to their final victory. Revan himself slew Mandalore the Ultimate and took his mask, and the activation of the superweapon known as the Mass Shadow Generator decimated the Mandalorian and Republic fleets above the planet. In the battle's aftermath, the Mandalorians were left leaderless, without the symbol of their people for leadership to transfer to another, and with most of their forces destroyed. Even though the Republic had also lost thousands, they had emerged, bloodied and raw, as the victors of the Mandalorian Wars. The galaxy celebrated, but the worst was yet to come. Following the Battle of Malachor V, Revan and Malak left for the unknown regions with a third of the fleet they had commanded, following a vision they had had. Revan had realized that something was wrong. Sensing a looming threat, he led his forces into the unknown, hoping to find and eliminate it. But the threat was waiting. What Revan and Malak found were the true Sith, sequestered and thriving out in the unknown regions. Led by Emperor Vitiate, this branch of the true Sith had been isolated since the Great Hyperspace War, and were now preparing to make their presence known to the galaxy once more. The two were determined that the true Sith needed to be stopped, but the horrors of the Mandalorian Wars had driven them into the grip of the dark side, which was only exacerbated by the influence of Darth Vitiate, the true Sith Emperor. And so the two believed that the only way to stop them was to build their own Sith Empire that could resist their assault. When the two returned to Republic space, it wasn't as returning heroes, but as conquerors. The two new Dark Lords of the Sith, as they proclaimed themselves, set out to create a new Sith Empire without the failings and corruption of the Republic. They were backed by the Republic fleet they had left with, but also by a massive armada of unknown origins. Their forces, however, weren't the greatest threat to the Republic. It was their charisma. Hundreds of Jedi and thousands of Republic military personnel knew Revan and Malak well. They had fought under them and alongside them throughout the Mandalorian Wars and looked up to them as their commanding officers and mentors. They were loyal to Revan the Man far more than they had ever been to a faceless, failing Republic or to the indifferent Jedi Council, and faced with the choice of fighting with him or against him, many willingly defected and joined forces with the Sith in what came to be known as the Jedi Civil War. And it was devastating. Not only did the Republic find itself fighting against the tactical genius that had saved them during the previous war, but they were also going up against hundreds of fallen Jedi and thousands of their own soldiers. For months, Revan and Malak flew circles around their opponents, winning battle after battle, seemingly with an unending supply of warships, starfighters, droids, and equipment, while the Republic struggled to find its feet. Once more, the Republic was on the brink of collapse, and it was saved by two people that were sworn enemies: a young Jedi Padawan and Darth Malak himself. Desperate to stop the Sith from taking over the galaxy, the Jedi Council came up with a desperate plan. Their hopes were laid on the shoulders of Padawan Bastila Shan, who despite her youth was gifted in the rare Jedi art of battle meditation, which had already saved the day on a few occasions. The plan was to orchestrate a naval battle, engaging Darth Revan's fleets with some decoy ships, while a small Jedi strike team snuck aboard their flagship and captured Revan and Malak, hoping to either end the war outright or at least buy them some more time to regroup. After sourcing some much needed information on Revan's fleet, the strike force was put together and a small group of Republic warships dropped out of hyperspace and engaged the Dark Lord's armada. In the beginning, the plan went smoothly. Bastila and her team of Jedi Knights were able to board Revan's flagship while the space battle raged and fight their way through the vessel's defenses until they reached the bridge where Revan was waiting. And this is where the course of Star Wars history changed forever. Even so outnumbered, there was no overselling Darth Revan's capabilities. Not only was he a brilliant tactician, but he was also strong in the Force and a gifted lightsaber fighter. Even with the support of Bastila's battle meditation, the knights that went up against him were in for the fight of their lives. It's unknown whether they would have been able to subdue and capture him, because this is where Darth Malak decided to take destiny into his own hands. Treachery is the way of the Sith, and a Sith does not share power. When Malak realized what was happening, he gave the order for the ships under his command to fire on the flagship's bridge, aiming to kill Revan and the Jedi in one fell swoop. With Revan gone, he would take the title of Dark Lord of the Sith for his own, crush the Republic, and rule the new Sith Empire alone. In that moment, Malak's power lust took the reins, and unwittingly, he wrote the first page in the chapter of his demise. As powerful as Revan was, the barrage was enough to knock him insensate. What Malak hadn't been counting on, however, was Bastila surviving. She was able to drag the Dark Lord's unconscious body out of the bridge and escape with it, bringing him back to the Jedi Enclave on Dantooine. There, the Jedi Council were able to heal his body and remove his memories of who he was and what he had done, essentially turning Revan into a clean slate they could manipulate. As he recovered and rejoined the conflict, he began working with Bastila and a small team to recover the scattered pieces of the star map, find the Starforge, and destroy it once and for all. During this journey, Revan eventually recovered his memories, but that wasn't enough to drag him back to the dark side. With Bastila and the other Jedi's help, Revan had been redeemed and took down Darth Malak. With Bastila and her friends' help, the redeemed Revan not only stopped the Sith, but he also saved the Republic from certain destruction. And therein lies the true travesty of Malak's treachery. By turning on Revan, Malak thought he was consolidating power into his own hands without risking his conquest of the Republic. Had Malak not betrayed Revan in that moment, had he not chosen to fire on the flagship, it's very likely that Revan would have survived the fight on the bridge, and together, the two Dark Lords of the Sith would have crushed the Republic. Instead, he unknowingly became the catalyst for Revan's redemption, which inevitably led to his own death, the destruction of the Starforge, and the collapse of his burgeoning Sith Empire. Without Malak, the Republic would have been destroyed, and with the true Sith lying in wait in the unknown regions, who knows what the fate of the galaxy would have looked like. But even this derailment of history isn't as monumentally impactful as the final betrayal we'll be looking at today. Of course, there's no other Sith whose betrayal changed the course of the Sith Order and galactic history more than Darth Bane. Of all the Sith betrayals we could ever talk about, this is one whose consequences stretched 1,000 years into the future, influencing not only the immediate response of Bane's allies and enemies, but those of hundreds of generations to come. The build-up to Bane's betrayal started almost 1,000 years before he stabbed his allies in the back, when the Galactic Republic went to war with the Sith Empire during the New Sith Wars. This was a series of conflicts that lasted approximately from 2000 to 1000 BBY, when Bane ended them decidedly. Over the course of those 1000 years, the Galactic Republic and Jedi Order clashed time and time again with the Sith, who sometimes banded together in larger forces, sometimes fought as independent microstates. During this time, the Sith often fought each other as much as they did the Jedi, and the galaxy was chaos because of it. Over the centuries that the New Sith Wars dragged on, the Republic grew increasingly weaker and more disoriented, losing thousands of worlds to the new Sith Empire. With the Republic's influence waning, the Jedi stepped up to take over leadership of the failing Republic. During this time, many of the Republic's supreme chancellors were Jedi. Jedi also took over the Republic Navy and Republic military when their leadership crumbled, and even took on protecting large swaths of space as local barons and Jedi lords, defending parts of the Republic from Sith incursions and pirates. In 1466 BBY, after a crushing Sith victory in the Battle of Mizra, it's widely accepted that the Republic took a turn for the worse and never recovered. Over the next centuries, the Republic's influence shrunk until it was restricted to the core worlds. Unable to support the HoloNet anymore, vast stretches of space outside the core were left unable to communicate with the rest of the galaxy. And if that weren't enough, an outbreak of the Kandorian Plague killed up to 60% of the population on many planets. This period was known as the Dark Age of the Republic, which spanned roughly the last century before the end of the New Sith Wars. On the bright side, it seemed as if the Sith weren't doing that much better at this point. Severely weakened by infighting, Sith forces were scattered across space, leaderless, and severely weakened by the millennia-long conflict. Seeing the state of their enemy, the Jedi had begun to hope that the end of the war was in sight and that victory was close at hand. That is, until Lord Khan, a prominent Sith Lord, took over the scattered Sith factions and united them under one banner. In 1010 BBY, Lord Khan reorganized the Sith into the Brotherhood of Darkness, a Sith empire connected by hierarchy and values. This kicked off the final period of the New Sith Wars, which would later become known as the Light and Darkness War between the Sith Brotherhood of Darkness and the Jedi Army of Light that stood to oppose them. In the beginning, with talented commanders like Lord Hoth on their side, the Jedi were able to secure some victories. They displaced the Brotherhood from their stronghold in the Cloak of the Sith, but Lord Khan and his forces instead retook Korriban, returning to their ancestral homeland and reopening the Sith Academy. The Sith also pushed hard into the core, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. Over the next several years, the conflict shifted toward the planet Ruusan near Kashyyyk, where a series of battles were fought around the end of the war. But before we talk about the end of the war, let's back up about 16 years to when Darth Bane came to be. The year is 1026 BBY, and a man named Desul is born on the planet Apatros, a poor mining world out in the Outer Rim territories. Apatros was famous for its cortosis mines, where most of the planet's population worked under horrific conditions for very little pay. Desul's birth resulted in his mother's death, a fact for which his father never forgave him for. Believing his son to be responsible for the death of his wife, Desul's father abused and beat him for his entire life, calling him the bane of his existence. At 16, Desul joined his father in the cortosis mines, where he was equally bullied and abused by his father's co-workers. 2 years later, Desul finally stood up to his father, who proceeded to beat him almost to death in a fit of drunken rage. That night, Desul lay awake, unable to sleep from the agony of the beating he'd received, his thoughts consumed by a thirst for revenge. In his mind's eye, he imagined his father's heart being crushed to death, and his hatred fueled his imagination. In the morning, he discovered his father's lifeless body. Without realizing it, Desul had called upon the dark side of the Force to murder his father. For the next 5 years, Desul remained on Apatros, hatred for the Republic growing almost as strong as his hatred for his father. At 23, he convinced a friend to smuggle him off-world so he could enlist in the Brotherhood of Darkness, which he did in 1003 BBY. Within their ranks, Desul quickly caught the attention of the reigning Dark Lords thanks to his Force sensitivity. Fairly soon, Desul was brought to Korriban to train at the Sith Academy. Following the millennia-old tradition, Desul left his name behind and took on a new Sith name. Knowing that his anger and hatred were the most potent sources of his power, he took on the nickname that brought them closest to the surface. And so, Bane was born. At the Academy, Bane excelled despite how late in life his abilities had been discovered. Trained by many of the Academy's best teachers, he became proficient with both the lightsaber and the Force. Bane also spent significant amounts of time studying Sith history and ideology in the Academy's archives. Through these studies, his perception of the Brotherhood slowly began to change. Learning about Sith philosophy led Bane to believe that, in order to keep the Sith from infighting as they had been, Lord Khan had perverted the teachings of the Sith, morphing the Brotherhood into a twisted, dark mirror of the Jedi Order. His research led him to the Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban, where ancient Sith Lords had been laid to rest. What Bane found, however, was that the spirits of the Sith had long since abandoned Korriban, cementing his belief that the new iteration of the Sith had strayed from the true path of the dark side. When he returned to the Academy, he was met with news. Lord Khan had ordered that all students be promoted to the rank of Dark Lord and sent to Ruusan to participate in the Ruusan campaign. Bane, however, refused. Instead of leaving for Ruusan, he went in search of the Temple of the Ancients, Darth Revan's old stronghold situated on the planet of Lehon. There, he discovered Revan's old Sith holocron in the temple's catacombs, from which he learned a variety of Sith teachings and techniques. But Lord Khan wasn't blind to Bane's doings. Beginning to see him as a threat, he ordered many of Bane's former teachers to assassinate him. All of them failed, though one got close. After dealing with the failed assassination attempts, Bane made his way to Ruusan and joined the Brotherhood's forces at their camp. There, in front of everyone, he took for himself the ancient Sith title of Darth, which Khan had to reluctantly tolerate, especially as Bane had come with a plan of victory in the coming 7th Battle of Ruusan. According to Bane's plan, the Sith were to assemble on a hilltop and unleash the raw power of the dark side on the Jedi. At first, the plan went very well. Fighting uphill, Jedi and Republic soldiers alike fell under the infernal barrack of dark side energy. However, the Brotherhood made a terrible call. Rather than sticking to the plan and annihilating their enemies from afar, Khan and the other Sith decided to break the ritual early and finish the Jedi off with an actual charge into battle. Perhaps they wanted to finish their enemies off personally, or perhaps Lord Khan didn't want their victory to be solely thanks to now Darth Bane. Whichever the case was, the charge failed miserably. Jedi reinforcements intercepted the Sith assault, breaking their ranks and routing their armies. Bane had seen enough. Khan's failure to wrap up the battle after victory had been handed to him on a silver platter solidified for him that this new incarnation of the Sith was a complete failure. In order for the Sith to prosper once more, they had to be remade. And for the Sith to be remade, The old remnants had to be cleansed from the earth. Treachery is the way of the Sith, and a Sith destroys what he perceives as weakness. After the battle, Bane taught Lord Khan one of the Sith techniques that he had learned from Revan's holocron. The technique was called a thought bomb, something that would consume and imprison the souls of everyone within a certain radius of the ritual site. Khan, by this point in time, was beginning to lose what was left of his sanity and convinced himself that he and the other Sith Lords were too powerful to be consumed by a mere ritual. Leaving them to it, Bane left the planet and watched from afar as Khan and the remaining Sith executed the thought bomb, killing themselves and 100 Jedi with them. Just like that, Bane's betrayal was complete. The Brotherhood of Darkness was no more, leaving him the sole surviving Sith Lord, free to remake the Sith as he saw fit. From the corpse-filled battlefield of Ruusan, Bane took a young girl whom he trained as his apprentice. His vision saw the Sith remade into a focus of the dark side, where there would only be two, a master and an apprentice. With only two Sith alive at the same time, the power of the dark side wouldn't be diluted by blithering fools like the various Sith Lords of the Brotherhood. Rather than building empires, Bane decided they would remain in the shadows, plotting, preparing, and seizing power for themselves until such a time came that they would rule the universe. This, more than any other betrayal, changed the course of history and the Sith forever. Bane's annihilation of the Brotherhood of Darkness brought an end to the New Sith Wars, which ended with a blood-stained victory for the Jedi and the Republic. Following the Ruusan Reformation, the Republic's central military was disbanded, the Republic was reformed, and the Jedi Order had many new restrictions and rules placed on their members to prevent more tragedies in the future. As we've discussed in other videos, the Reformation had long-reaching consequences, even as far as the Clone Wars. With no centralized Republic military, there would one day be a need for the Grand Army of the Republic, even though it had been supplied by a shady source. Though the Reformation secured the Republic's survival and even ushered in a millennium of prosperity, they sowed the seeds that would one day blossom into corruption, eventually leading to the Clone Wars. As for the Sith, Bane's betrayal completely reinvented them. For millennia, they had worked as an order, with thousands of Sith working simultaneously with and against each other to secure their personal power and place in the galaxy. After Bane, the Sith were reborn into the rule of two, a master and apprentice that worked together until the apprentice was ready to usurp the seat of Dark Lord of the Sith. Thanks to the rule of two and Bane's careful planning, the Jedi believed the Sith to be destroyed for good. Over the next millennium, the galaxy breathed fresh air for the first time in a very long time. Believing themselves free of the threat of the Sith at last, the Jedi grew increasingly complacent, blinded to the growing threat in the galaxy. By the time the Clone Wars broke out, it was almost inconceivable that the Sith had not only survived, but returned. By destroying the Brotherhood, Bane had not only strengthened the Sith, but also weakened the Jedi in the process. Had Lord Khan succeeded in assassinating Bane, or had Bane not chosen to wipe the Brotherhood out, its likely history would have taken a very different path, one that would have never led to the tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise or the prophecy of the Chosen One. It's hard to say how the Ruusan campaign would have concluded, or whether the Republic would have ever recovered or ceased to exist entirely. What we can all agree on is that history would have looked very different, for better or for worse. That was the story of 3 Sith betrayals that completely changed the course of Star Wars history. But Sith history is long and full of treachery. Are there any other betrayals you'd like to hear us talk about in a future video? Any that potentially eclipse the 3 we've mentioned in today's video? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.